Hello, I'm Jill from GillyMac Designs, and today I'm going to be having a play with the tapering function on this Janome Horizon Memory Craft 9480 QC Professional. So we'll start off looking at what tapering is, and then we'll go on, have a look at how you would set up this machine to do it and all the different options that you can play with. And then we're going to have a go at doing a couple of little practices ourselves, and then I've got a project in mind that I want to show you that's been on my mind for a little while. So let's get started. So let's start by thinking about what tapering is. So if we just want to do a section of stitches, let's say it's zigzag, and we zigzag from the beginning here to the end, then we start off and we'd have quite a big zigzag all the way down, and we'd end with a big zigzag, and it would just stop. What tapering does is it grows from the point that you tell it to start. It grows. This isn't a zigzag, but it looks a little bit like a zigzag. It grows to its full width. It does its job, and then when you tell it to stop, it goes back down to zero, so it tapers back down. Okay, now with this machine there are loads of different tapering options, and I'm going to show you some of those. Now last night when I was preparing to do this video, I started to have some ideas about what I could do with tapering. So although that's one line, I then turned my fabric around and started to do them in boxes. So this is the type of, in the absolute simplest way, things that you could do with tapering. So we're going to have a little look now at what functions there are on the machine, and this is just a little introduction to what you can do with this machine and tapering. So back to the home screen, and we have our quick access to utility stitches, decorative stitches, monogramming, tapering and applications. Let's go into tapering. So lots happening on this screen. So let's start off with down the left hand side. You can see the stitch that's been selected is shown, and down at the bottom you can see that the foot that is being requested used is the clear view foot, the applique foot, and I've actually got an open-toed version of that on the machine today. So let's have a look here at the different stitches. There are 44 different stitches that are suitable to be used with tapering, and you can access those through this function. So it selects all those stitches that you can use. Let's go back to the beginning. Now, to show you how this looks and best demonstrate it, I'm going to select a different stitch that comes up really nice and dark, this one. Okay, so here you can see, just as I was talking about in the example, you're growing from 0 up to your maximum stitch width. So our maximum stitch width is 9, and you're carrying on, you're doing your satin stitch, and then you then go back down to 0 again. So it looks really, really neat. You're going to start off here. You've got an option of starting off with a lock stitch and ending with a lock stitch, but we can change that. We could toggle that off, toggle it on, toggle it off, toggle it on. Okay. But then also what we can do is we can change the tips and decide what we want. So if we go into here, now look at that, we've got loads of options. So let's just look at the top. At the moment, we're going to a 60-degree point. So that's like an equilateral triangle. We could do a 30-degree one side or a 30-degree the other. We could do 45-degree one way, 45-degree the other. We could have a right angle at the top there, which is a bit more stubby. We could go an even almost flatter one at the top, 120. We could do 60 that way or 60 this way, or we can actually turn it off if we wanted to. So you just start here. There's no, if you like, lead in, no tapering in. So you can turn it off at either end if you prefer. So let's go back to our 60, okay? You can do exactly the same at the bottom, so we can change it to all these different angles. Now I'm going to show you why I think those angles are so important and so useful a little bit later on, because at the moment it's quite a lot to take in why we do need all these different angles. Down at the bottom you can go back to default. You can mirror your pattern, so you may have a pattern there that's working really well, and the next time you run it you may want to have the mirror image, so you can do that here, and you can save your pattern if you'd like to here. In the middle, this middle section, you have a couple of options. So when we start off, we may know how many stitch patterns we want, and if that's the case, we press number of stitch patterns, and we say, let's say we want 8 stitch patterns, and what the system will do is it'll start with this, it'll do 8 stitch patterns, and then it will end with this, and that'll do that automatically. Okay. Alternatively, you may not know how many stitch patterns you want, so you can just put infinity, and it will carry on until you tell it to stop, and you tell it to stop by pressing your lock stitch button. Okay, so you've got a couple of options, and we're going to have a little play with those options in a moment. So we'll set the top, and I'm going to leave it at 60 for now, set the bottom, leave it at 60, and we can leave it at infinity for now, and then when we want to end, we can just press the lock stitch button, which is the one with a little dot in the middle, and we can then it'll immediately start to taper off and stop. Okay, so let's have a go at doing just a 60 degree with nothing, no set patterns, and seeing how that stitches out on a piece of denim. Okay, so let's see how this sews out. I've drawn some grids on this piece of fabric, but that's for something we might do later. So off we go. You can see it's growing into its maximum stitch. Now I'm going to press my lock stitch button to stop it, to make it go. Next time it's at the end of this, it'll start to make it smaller. Now, an interesting thing happens now. Back on the screen, it asks you a question. Let's have a look. So it's saying you have just done 6 complete patterns and you've tapered at the end. The next time you do a piece of work, do you want to do the same size or do you want to make it different? If you do the same size, it will do exactly that. It'll taper up just as we've told it to. It'll do 6 and it'll finish and you won't have to do anything. If you do a different size, it will start as we've done before. You'll let it carry on and do as many different numbers of the stitch pattern, so iterations of the stitch pattern as you want, and then you'll press the lock stitch button and it'll stop. So let's say we want a different size. Okay, so it's set up for me to start again. Let's just have a look at how that looks first. So here's the stitch we've just done, and you can see it's tapered at the beginning, it's then gone on and done its full width of stitch and then tapered at the end. It's just slightly scrunched at the end, and that's because it probably, with a stitch of this width and with this density, needed some embroidery stabilising paper on the back. That said, it's so much nicer than a stitch that is just starts wide, ends wide, and looks like you've just had a thought in the middle of something. Let's do some stitches and then just stopped. This has a purpose, it stops and it starts. Let's have another go with a different stitch and let's use my grid. So as I say, we've got 44 stitches. Why don't we choose this one here? And let's have a look at our tapering options here. So at the moment it's set to go down at 30. I think I want it to go at 45. Okay, and 45. And the other thing I want is I'm going to do a box, and I want my I want these points to be inside the box. So let's change that around. There we go. So we've got 45 straight, 45, and my points are going to be inside the box. So I'm going to draw my box, if you like, that way, this way, up way, and across ways. So press OK at the top. All right, we're ready to stitch. Let's stitch that out. Now, sorry, just one more thing here while I do it. I've kept that at infinity. Shall we set it to a complete number? What about if we set it to 5? So it means it's going to come up, do 5 iterations of this, and then it's going to go back down. Let's see what happens. Do OK. Okay, let's stitch this out. So remember, we've got a starting at 45 degrees. We've got 5 iterations of the pattern, and then it will go back down at 45 degrees. Okay, so it's finished. I've still got my foot on the foot pedal and it just finishes itself. Now the reason I've drawn these grids on is I want to go at right angles to where I've just travelled, and I'm going to say that I want to do an identical version of this pattern to try and give me a box. So we're going to do the same again. Yep, just checking. We're good. We're going to do exactly the same again. Just because I've got these lines on, I can just make sure I'm not going off at a tangent somewhere. Perfect. So I'm going to do the same again, turn round, go back up. Okay, and then I'm just going to turn around again. And let's see if we start off where we end up where we started off. Wow, that's pretty amazing, isn't it? So you can start to see how powerful that could be. Now, I've only played with this for a short time and I am loving it. I'm going to do another one. This time, I'm not going to program the amount of repeats I'm going to do in the middle. Instead, I'm going to let my first line dictate it, and then we can say, okay, that's how big our square is going to be. So let's do a square within a square. Okay, so I'm going to press my lock stitch button. It starts to flash, and then what that means is it will finish off this pattern and then it will do its ending 45 degrees. It's finishing off that pattern. Okay, it's doing its 45 now. Okay, so on the screen, let me show you. There we go, can you see that? Okay, so it's saying I've done a starting, I've done 18 patterns, and I've done a finishing. Do I want to do the same size? Well, I'm going to say yes, because I'm going to allow that first side to determine how big my square is. So I'm going to do OK, and then I'm going to do the other 3 sides of my square based on that and see if I end up back in the right place. Wow. So I did go a little bit off here, but it's not bad. I think that you could, what this reminds me of is like a Sashiko sampler. And I think that you could create, if I hadn't gone, you probably can see I've just wiggled just slightly off my line here because I'm doing the camera as well, so I've just gone off. But I think that you could do the most amazing sampler, maybe even one as a tablecloth, but yeah, or a wall hanging, to be honest, with all of these different stitches and using different shapes. Now, I have an idea about how I'd like to use this. It's been on my mind for a little while. But before I do, I just want to show you some thoughts I've had on how you would use the different angles, because they are a bit mind-blowing, and it's easy for you to see how you can use it for a square. But let me show you some different shapes that I think you could use this with. And if we're doing a rectangle or a square, then we know that the angle here is 90 degrees. So if we have our tapering at 45 and we have it tapered coming in to our point and then turn, and we know the next one is at 45, so we start at 45, we end at 45, then start at 45 and then end at 45, we're going to get this lovely rectangle shape. Same thing for a square, but for a square we can use the we could set one side with, you know, we can just use our infinity button and then the lock stitch to determine the side of the length of that side, and then that side can then be repeated another 3 times. And if we've got this 45-degree thing going on, then it's going to look amazing. But what happens if we've got some different shapes? I just want to give you a couple of different shape options. But once you can fit a triangle into anything, you can do all sorts. So a triangle, an equilateral triangle will have 60. So if we were doing a triangle and we'd come down, an equilateral triangle, we'd come down and we'd taper at 30, and then we start again at 30, go along, finish at 30, go along 30, and that would look perfect. So we get the same type of cornering effect, but this time for a triangle. Here, if we were doing, this is a bit more tricky, this is a right angle triangle. So I'd set myself up at 45. So I'd start at 45 here, okay, 45-degree angle, come down, end at 45. Then I'd start at 45 and I'd end at 45. And then can you see, if I've ended at 45, I'll end here, and then I can just start my line at 45 here, and it will go all the way up and it will match my other line that's 45. So although it's a little bit more tricky, if you just do everything at 45, that would work. You just reposition here, you'd finish here, so you'd reposition your needle to start there. That's the only difference. And then I wanted to, so those are pretty humdrum shapes, but if you looked at hexagon as well, and these are just a few shapes, so they're just the ones that come to the top of my mind that I use all the time. So hexagons are made up of, really you can make up lots of things, but I always make them up of triangles. So I've got my equilateral triangles. So if I was going round the edges of my hexagon, then all I'd need to do is set my degrees for 60 degrees. I'd go up 60 degrees, long 60 degrees, 60 degrees, and then it would fit in absolutely perfectly. So yes, there's so many options of what you could do. So I have in mind that sampler. Next thing I want to show you is I want to show you how you could use this with something called a wing needle, or sometimes it's called a hem stitch needle. So this is the needle I've just taken out of my machine, which is a Janome purple tip, and this is a wing needle, or sometimes it's called a hem stitch needle. What this does is, on fabric with a loose weave, it will create almost a, well, it does, it creates a hole within it. And often you would use this needle in conjunction with heirloom stitches, and it creates almost like a lace effect on the edges of garments or napkins or tableware, all sorts of things. Now I use this quite a bit to create different effects, but it's on my mind that if I combine the wing needle with the tapering function and the heirloom stitches that are available within the tapering function, I could do a really nice edge to my napkins. I've prepared these earlier. They're just an old tablecloth, okay, that I've just created some mitered corners on. and we're going to focus on sewing on this side, and we're going to use an heirloom stitch, and we're going to go to the corner and we're going to create a really nice 45-degree corner and then go off again. So let's see what we can do. Right, let's see what this looks like. So I hope you can see that. You can just see that the wing needle has pushed the fibres apart so that when the heirloom stitch has gone in, it's created almost like it's like a cross stitch effect where it's pulled the weave, and so you just get these tiny stitches that look almost lace-like, which works really well. Now here was my beginning here and my end here, so it didn't quite match up. Let's have a look at a different corner. That corner was much better, looked very neat. So you can see that you can do all sorts of things with this stitch, and you can be really creative, like a hem stitch needle or wing needle. You could do so many decorative effects with the tapering function and use them in all sorts of shapes. I hope you've enjoyed doing that with me.